One of these Samsung soundbars looks like the sensible mid-range choice until you find out it needs a $300 add-on to do what the cheaper one already does. That's the kind of detail that turns a good deal into a bad one. I went through the whole lineup so you don't have to. 5 bars, honest pricing, and one clear winner. Flagship first. So we know what the ceiling actually looks like. The HWQ990H is Samsung's 2026 flagship. It costs $1,999, and on paper, it's the most complete home audio system the company sells. You get 11.1.4 channels, which in plain English means a main bar, a separate wireless subwoofer, and 2 wireless rear speakers that sit behind your seating. Before we get deeper into this, if you want more breakdowns like this one where the pricing gets checked properly, tap subscribe and the next one will find you. Also file this away for later, because there's a feature Samsung leans on heavily to sell these bars that stops working entirely depending on what TV you own, and I'm saving that for the end, because it can flip your whole decision. Back to the flagship. Those 4 up-firing channels fire sound at your ceiling so it reflects back down, which is how Dolby Atmos creates the sense of height during a storm scene or a helicopter pass. The rear speakers matter more than any spec sheet line here, because most soundbars fake surround by bouncing sound off your sidewalls, and that illusion falls apart in an open-plan room with nothing to bounce off. Real rears skip the trick entirely. When something moves behind you in a film, it actually moves behind you. Let me put those 23 drivers into something you can picture, because a channel count on a box means very little until you hear what it's doing. 11 of those channels handle everything in front of and around you. 1 is dedicated to the subwoofer, and 4 fire upward. Each group is solving a different problem. The front channels plays dialogue and effects across your screen, the surrounds wrap the room, the sub carries everything you feel rather than hear, and the up-firing pair creates the ceiling. Strip any one of those out and you lose a specific part of a film's sound rather than just losing volume. That's why channel counts on soundbars aren't marketing noise the way megapixels can be. Each number is a real speaker doing a real job. This model also adds SpaceFit Sound Pro, which continuously listens to your room and adjusts the output rather than calibrating once and forgetting. The woofer tuning was revised over the previous generation, and it carries Samsung's Eclipse audio format alongside Dolby Atmos. Worth knowing too, this system supports gaming features like 4K pass-through at high refresh rates, so a console runs through it without costing you picture quality, which matters if the TV only has a couple of good HDMI ports. So who is this actually for? Someone with a dedicated room, space behind the sofa for 2 extra speakers, and power outlets back there to run them. If that describes your setup and the budget is real, nothing else in this lineup competes. Something else that separates a flagship from the rest is how it handles a room that isn't symmetrical and almost no living room is. Continuous calibration means the bar keeps adapting as you move furniture or as the room fills with people, rather than being tuned once on a quiet afternoon and drifting out of alignment for the next 5 years. Here's where I'd push back on the price though. The improvements over the previous flagship are refinements, not reinventions, and the sound signature between the 2 generations sits close enough that most people in a normal room would struggle to pick them apart. $2,000 buys a genuinely magnificent system. It also buys a lot of things that aren't a soundbar. There's also a step below the flagship, the Q930H at around $1,500, which keeps the rear speakers and drops down to 9.1.4. So if you want real rears without the top price, that's worth a look while we go through these. But the flagship's biggest competition isn't the model below it or a rival brand. It's the bar Samsung was selling 12 months ago, which is still on shelves, still excellent, and priced in a way that makes this whole conversation awkward. Smart buy, and this is the one I'd point most home theater buyers toward. The HWQ990F was the 2025 flagship. It has the same 11.1.4 layout, the same wireless subwoofer and rear speakers, and it collected best-in-class awards when it launched. It currently sells around $1,000, sometimes dipping below that when a sale lands. So compare that to the $2,000 model we just covered. Same channel count, same 4-piece system, same core Atmos experience, roughly half the money. The newer bar adds continuous room calibration and refined tuning, and I'm not going to pretend those are nothing, they're real engineering. but paying a second $1,000 for them is a very different claim than saying they exist. Here's the thing about soundbars specifically that makes last year's model such a strong buy, and it doesn't apply to most tech. A phone gets slower as software gets heavier, a laptop ages out of new features, but a soundbar plays sound. There's no operating system that outgrows it and no app store leaving it behind. The Q990F will sound exactly as good in 5 years as it does the day you plug it in. That changes the math on buying last year's version, because you're not inheriting a shorter lifespan, you're just skipping a price premium. There's another angle on last year's model that people rarely think about, and it works in your favor. A product that's been on the market for a year has been through its firmware updates, its early quirks have been found and fixed, and every review of it exists already. You're buying a known quantity rather than a launch product. On something that's going to sit under your TV for the next decade, that maturity has genuine value, and you're being paid to accept it rather than charged for it. That's an unusual position to be in as a buyer, and it doesn't last forever. Setup is the same easy story too. The subwoofer and rear speakers pair themselves wirelessly, one HDMI cable runs to the TV, and the system handles the rest. The one thing to check before ordering is that your TV has an HDMI port labeled eARC, because that's what carries the full uncompressed audio to the bar. Almost every TV from the last several years has it, and it's a 30-second look at the back panel that saves a real headache. If you're wondering whether you'd hear the difference between the two generations in a blind test at home, most people wouldn't, and that's not an insult to either bar. It's just where soundbar engineering has landed. The honest limitation is availability. Last year's flagship is a finite pile of stock, and when it runs out, that price advantage disappears with it. The other thing you're getting with a mature model is a healthy accessory and support ecosystem. So replacement remotes, wall brackets, and spare parts are all easy to find rather than being back-ordered while a new product ramps up. So if this is your pick, it's not a decision to sit on for 6 months. Now, this next bar is where the video gets interesting, because on the shelf, it looks like the reasonable step down from everything we've just discussed, and the price tag tells a completely different story once you understand what's missing from the box. Middle trap and the HWQ800. H is the model I want you to look at very carefully. It costs $1,099 and it's a 5.1.2 system, meaning a main bar with 2 up-firing drivers plus a wireless subwoofer. What it does not include is rear speakers. Now read those two numbers next to each other. This bar costs $100 more than a discounted Q990F, which has 11 channels and includes both the subwoofer and 2 rear speakers. You're paying more for less, and it gets sharper when you try to close the gap, because Samsung sells a wireless rear speaker kit for roughly $300 to add surround to this bar. Add that and you're over $1,300 for a 7.1.2 setup, still short of what the older flagship gives you for around $1,000. That's the catch from the start of this video, and it's not hidden in fine print, it's just never mentioned out loud when you're standing in a store looking at a shelf. Does this bar sound bad? Not at all. It's a well-built Samsung Q series product with Q-Symphony, adaptive sound that adjusts to what you're watching, and a proper subwoofer doing the heavy lifting on bass. In isolation, it's a good soundbar. The problem is, it doesn't exist in isolation. It sits on a shelf next to better value, and that's the only fair way to judge a purchase. Let me widen this out for a second, because the pattern here is worth recognizing whenever you shop for audio. Manufacturers price a lineup so each model looks reasonable against the one directly above it, not against last year's stock sitting on the same shelf. Walk in comparing only the current models and the mid-range bar looks sensible. Compare across generations and the picture changes completely. That's not a scandal, it's just how product lines are built. But it means the smart move is always to check what the previous flagship is selling for before you commit to anything in the middle of the current range. 5 minutes of that comparison is worth more than any single spec on the box. There is one scenario where it makes sense, and I want to be fair about it. If your living room genuinely has nowhere for rear speakers, no space behind the sofa, no outlets back there, kids and pets running through, then a 5.1.2 bar and sub is the right shape for your room, and the extra channels on the flagship would be wasted. Ask yourself honestly whether you'd actually install speakers behind your seating, or whether they'd end up in a closet after 2 months. That single answer is worth more than any spec comparison. I'd also weigh how often you actually watch films with real surround mixes versus sports, news, and streaming shows, because a bar without rears loses very little on everyday viewing and loses the most on exactly the kind of blockbuster people buy these systems for. But if the answer is that you would use them, this bar is the expensive route to a smaller result. And if you already own this bar and you're wondering whether to add the rear kit, that's a different calculation, because at that point you're comparing $300 against selling and rebuying, and adding the rears is usually the right call. There's also a placement detail worth knowing. A separate subwoofer needs real floor space and shouldn't be jammed into a corner behind furniture, or the bass turns into a muddy thump. Which raises a fair question: what if you have no room for a subwoofer at all, and every bar so far has assumed you do? No subwoofer. And that's exactly the problem the HWQS90H was built to solve. It runs $999, and the headline is a 7.1.2 channel layout, with around 13 speakers packed into a single bar, with the bass handled internally rather than by a separate box. No subwoofer on the floor, no rear speakers on stands, one piece under the TV, and that's your system. For apartments, for rooms where furniture placement is already a compromise, or for anyone who simply doesn't want boxes scattered around, that's a genuinely different proposition from everything else here. The clever piece of engineering is a gyro sensor inside the bar. It detects whether you've wall-mounted it or set it on a stand, and re-orients how the drivers fire to match. Wall mount a normal soundbar and the sound aims at your ceiling or your knees depending on the angle, and most people never realize their expensive bar is pointed wrong. This one adjusts itself. It's the kind of feature that sounds minor in a spec list and matters a lot in a real living room. It's also the obvious match for Samsung's lifestyle TVs, the Frame and the Serif, where the entire point is that the setup disappears into the room. Buying one of those and then parking a subwoofer on the floor undoes the whole aesthetic. One more practical note on this bar that applies to anyone considering it. Because everything lives in a single enclosure, setup is about as simple as audio gets. One cable to the TV and you're finished, with nothing to pair and nothing to position. That matters more than it sounds for people who've been putting off buying a sound system because they picture an afternoon of wiring and configuration. There's no afternoon here. You unbox it, connect it, and the room sounds better in about 4 minutes. The honest trade-off is physics, and I won't dress it up. Bass from a compact built-in system cannot match a dedicated subwoofer with a large driver and a big enclosure. You'll get clean, controlled, low-end that suits music and dialogue beautifully, but you won't feel an explosion in your chest the way the flagship delivers. What you're buying is the best sound available without adding a single extra object to your room, and for a lot of people, that constraint is real and worth respecting. Bear in mind as well that a single-piece bar is far easier to move, so if you rent or expect to rearrange rooms, that flexibility has real value that never shows up on a spec sheet. Compare it to the HWQ800H for a second, because at $99 less, it gives you more channels and fewer boxes, just with less bass authority. Which of those matters more depends entirely on your room, not on which number is bigger. So that covers premium, value, mid-range, and all-in-one. But every bar so far starts around $1,000, and the truth is that most people asking me about soundbars aren't shopping anywhere near that number. Small spaces, and this is where the biggest upgrade of the entire video actually happens. Samsung's compact series bars, like the HWS60D, are slim single-piece systems built for bedrooms, apartments, offices, and smaller living rooms, and they cost a fraction of everything else we've covered. Let me explain why this tier matters more than the price suggests. Modern TVs are so thin that their speakers fire downward or backward out of a panel a few millimeters deep, which is hopeless for producing mid-range, and mid-range is exactly where human voices live. That's why you turn the volume up to catch dialogue and then dive for the remote when the action starts. Every soundbar on this list fixes that, including the cheapest one. The jump from TV speakers to a decent bar is night and day. The jump from a decent bar to a flagship is real but far smaller. And the jump from great to absolute best is something you have to concentrate to hear. Diminishing returns hit hard in audio, and almost all of the value sits in that first step. These slim bars also sit low enough that they don't block the bottom of your screen or cover the remote sensor, which sounds trivial until it happens to you. They support Q-Symphony with a compatible Samsung TV like the rest of the range, so the ecosystem benefit isn't reserved for the expensive model. And if you're buying for someone else as a gift, this tier is the safest choice by a distance because it works in any room, needs no planning, and nobody has to find floor space for a subwoofer they didn't ask for. The trade-offs are exactly what you'd expect. Less bass depth without a dedicated sub, no real surround from behind, and less headroom for filling a large open space. If your room is big or you love feeling the low end, you'll outgrow one. If your room is normal sized and you mainly want dialogue you can hear and sound that fills the space properly, this does the job for a fraction of flagship money. There's a budgeting principle underneath all of this that's worth saying plainly. Your soundbar is one part of the picture, and the room it sits in is another, so a modest bar in a well-arranged living room can easily outperform an expensive one shoved into a bad corner with the subwoofer wedged behind an armchair. Placement is free. Before you spend up a tier, move things around and see what your current setup is actually capable of, because a surprising number of people upgrade to fix a problem that was really about where the boxes were sitting. Now let me pull all 5 together, plus the thing I flagged at the start. If you have a dedicated theater room and the budget, the HWQ990H flagship at $2,000 is the ceiling. For most home theater buyers, the HWQ990F at around $1,000 is the smarter buy, same layout for half the money while stock holds. The HWQ800H at $1,099 is the one to approach carefully, because rear speakers cost another $300 on top. The HWQS90H at $999 solves the no space problem better than anything else here. And a compact series bar delivers the single biggest improvement per dollar in the whole lineup. Here's the part I saved. Samsung's standout feature is Q-Symphony, and what it does is keep your TV's own speakers running alongside the soundbar instead of switching them off, so voices lift toward the screen and the sound stage widens. It's excellent, and it works only with compatible Samsung TVs from roughly the last few years. On an LG, a Sony, a TCL, it's simply off, not reduced, off. So if your TV isn't a Samsung, a meaningful slice of what you're paying for never activates, and you owe it to yourself to price Sonos, Sony, and JBL against these before committing. That's the single most useful thing in this video, and no store is going to volunteer it. 2 things that will move on you. Soundbar prices swing hard around sale periods, so check what any of these actually cost today, rather than trusting a number in a video. And last year's flagship sells out eventually, which is the whole reason it's such a bargain right now. What's on your wall, and how much space is behind your sofa? Those 2 answers decide this more than anything else, so drop them below and I'll help you narrow it down. Sound is the half of home entertainment. Almost everyone underfunds, and fixing it changes movie night more than another few inches of screen ever will. That's the Samsung soundbar lineup, priced honestly. The HWQ990H is the flagship ceiling at $2,000. The HWQ990F is the smart money at around half that, with the same 11.1.4 setup. The HWQ800H needs a $300 rear kit before it competes. The HWQ-S90H is the answer when there's no room for a subwoofer, and the compact series gives you the biggest jump per dollar of anything here. And remember to check what brand your TV is before you spend, because Q-Symphony only wakes up for Samsung. Which one fits your room? Tell me below. If this saved you a few $100s, hit like and subscribe to Premium Tech. Catch you in the next one. Peace.